Virtual Piano Podcast, Episode 2, Piano PopMatics, a unique approach to teaching pop piano. Welcome to Episode 2 of the Virtual Piano Podcast. This episode is titled Piano PopMatics, a unique approach to teaching pop piano. This episode is part 2 of a 3-part series exploring popular music and how we can effectively teach and learn this indispensable style on piano. In the first episode, my guest, Tony Parlapiano, and I discussed various ideas and thoughts related to the value of teaching pop piano. This episode will dive deep into his method of teaching, PopMatics, which helps to create self-motivated students, skilled musicians, and lifelong learners of the instrument. There are a lot of visual demonstrations supporting the discussion today, so you might want to check out the YouTube video podcast available at youtube.com/virtualpianostudio, all one word. And also, I had Tony perform an improvised arrangement of the song being discussed in today's podcast, which is A Million Dreams. But due to copyright laws, it will only be available on the YouTube video podcast. Feel free to check that out to see how all of this comes together.
So the first thing I wanted to talk about is kind of the whole foundation of my approach is teaching through a number system, which is, pretty common. There's the most popular one I think that a lot of people are familiar with is heard the Nashville number system. But, regardless of where you are, or what genre you're working in, like most people think of the chords in terms of numbers. You learn your perfect cadences, your 1, 4, 5, 7s. In jazz, you learn all your 2, 5, 1 progressions. And we're used to thinking of it in that way. But even on just a more basic level, even when I'm teaching things from, if you're just teaching C major scale going up and down, like instead of calling it C, D, E, F, G, I just 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 and going up. And so the reason that I'd like to do this from the beginning is one, especially if you're a little kid, like, okay, it's fine. You can go up the alphabet, C, D, E, F, G, but like sometimes coming backwards is a little harder to say those, backwards. But a lot of kids know the number. And they know from 1 to 3, it's like, oh, that's that I got to skip a 2, and how far away those are. So hearing things in that way. So everything
really quickly, I just want to mention real quick that it's also, you're teaching them functional harmony from the very first lesson too, without them really knowing what that means.
Right. And yeah, and some of that stuff, you need to learn as a teacher, like when to like edit yourself, because there's like so much information, but you have to like always stay tuned in to figure out like, are they catching this right now? It's like the thing, like working with a toddler. It's like you can spend months trying to teach them all the colors of the rainbow, and it's like they'll learn them all in 5 seconds when they're ready. So it's you need to know when to kind of like drop the theory grenades. What I start with, this is a template that I have here that I work with my students, and I'm going to go ahead and write on it here. So starting off, so we'll do this for A Million Dreams, which is in the key of G major. So I write that right here. So G major key. And then what I do is just write the notes of the scale. Now, I have my own way of teaching a scale, but I'm not going to go through that. Everybody has their own approach to teaching scales. And so if I write these in, G, A, B, C, D, E, F sharp, and G. So the kid has the scale there. I always start with 1-finger scales. So the students are just... I want them to see the shape of the scale. I don't think a lot of people do that right away. If you're using proper like fingerings right away, you're more focused on the fingerings and not so much the shape of the scale. So I always love to start everybody with 1-finger scales, and then kind of like tracing the shape, like dragging their fingers across the keyboard, touching but not pressing the key, and then sometimes even closing their eyes and just drawing that shape in the air, Mm-hmm. Because C major scale, you don't really have to do that with. Everybody gets the concept of, okay, all the white keys and none of the black keys. Like, even if you don't play piano, you probably understand that. But as soon as you start introducing one black key, it's like, well, which one? Where does that happen? Mm-hmm. So what I'm going to do here is, this is something kind of recent that I've done. Although I've done this exercise with students before, the presentation is a little different. So what I'm going to do is uncover right here. We have the numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and then I have 1 in parentheses there. So that's I call that the repeater for students. So when they get up there, they know the 7 different notes of the scale. And so these numbers, they're representing kind of chord function, like you said, this functional harmony. So they don't know which ones are major and minor and diminished and all that stuff yet, but we're talking about scale degrees here in terms of finding the melody. So, that's the next thing. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and hearing all those repeated notes through there. And so what I have underneath here is you'll see just these like one little dash here. And this exercise is called Area 51. And so what we're focusing on here is the 5 and the 1 repeater. So what I'm having the students do is in their right hand, I want them to play those notes. So let me slide this over. So in the right hand, I'm having them play the D and the G, and I usually have them go first and third finger here with this. And then what we're doing is those little dashes are representing basically quarter notes, what they're doing in their right hand. So they're just going to play G and D, and then in the left hand, they're running right up that scale, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, repeater. And you ask them and you say, they pretty much all sound good, right? They all sound good together. They might catch a little clash on the 7, but quickly resolves back.
I love that sound.
What's that?
I love that.
Oh, me too. But sometimes they're not ready for it yet. It's like that. It's like the Back to the Future thing. You may not be ready for this, but your kids are going to love it. So anyway, from here, that's just a basic progression. So the next thing I might have them do from there is I have these certain sequences that I love to teach. And so the next sequence is just 1, 4, 5, 4, 1. And you'll see that I've kind of expanded it here with what they're going to do. So now they're going to get 4 hits in the right hand with every number. So they get 1, 4, to the 5, 4, and then the final one, they hit and just hold it. So that's what the dashes are for. They can play through it. It doesn't really matter. But it's this is what I'm setting them up with. This is all about teaching the primary chords, right?
They're also learning rhythm patterns from the very start too.
Totally.
And just kind of feeding that into their subconscious, and then all of a sudden when you're like, let's talk about rhythm patterns, then they already kind of know what you're talking about.
Yep. And what I'll mention, so I'll show maybe like one more here, and then just kind of uncover the rest so you can see it. But so here's the next example, and now we got half notes going, right? So in this example, I might have them start in the left hand first. 1, 3, 4, 6, 5, 7, 1. And if they're a straight up beginner, I don't care. They can use one finger for this. They don't need anything more than that. But so this one, we got 2 for each one. And all I'm really trying to get them to do here is just kind of associate the number and the distance between those notes. And once they understand the shape of the scale, they know which notes they're not going to be pressing. I usually always start this example in C, just because it's, they don't have to worry about any black keys. And then from here, I just keep expanding it. And there is a reason that the numbers are in the order that they're in. I'm not going to get into all of that right now because it would extend too far. But this one here, we have more, more examples here. So this is the 1, 3, 6, but we're holding it for 4, and then 2, 4, 5, 7, 1. And like I said, there's another example here, but once we move away from this, the next thing I might have them do is instead of playing those solid chords, we'll break them up. And so the whole idea with this Area 51 is we're sticking a lot with this 5 and 1, because the properties of 5 and 1, they work with like every chord. They have a different relationship with each number. Right here it's the 5 and the 1.
They're consonant like throughout.
Exactly. And so if that becomes the foundation from here, you can start to add in the 2. Bring in the 7. And I tell them, whenever it gets, you feel like you're getting too far off, return to the 5 and the 1. Everything's going to sound good. Clear blue skies, right? There's no storm here. And it's that's one of the ways we'll kind of work through this. And then I might even just do little things on the page here where like I'm going to throw in these little purple arrows here, which is just like made up stuff. But so what I'm telling the student to do here is, okay, on the first one, we're still going to connect that. But then what I want you to do is I want you to push the 4 in before the next, the next bar here. So you got 1. See if they can feel that. Right? So it's a very simple exercise, but it sounds great. And then once they're done with this, following these rules, or these sequences, they just go ahead and make up their own. And what I'll do at that point is I'll say, "Can I join you?" And I'll come up on the top end and just make up melodies. And usually do them, unison octaves apart, and just kind of play along with them. And what's so great about this too is like, you can get a parent to come in if you're doing this in the key of C, and you can just tell a parent, "Hey, I just want you to use your finger and just play the notes in C, and just you're gonna play with your kid, And I think that's a nice thing too. And it's such a simple exercise, but it's bringing them together. And there's so much joy in that process of just the parent connecting with their child.
So show us how that would connect into actually maybe teaching this song to, maybe a young beginner, then maybe an older beginner.
Okay, so for an example, for something like A Million Dreams, let's say you're working with somebody, who a teenager. We could take this Area 51 exercise. And if we know the chord progression, and we know that this song, it starts with a G chord, D over F sharp, E minor 7, and then goes down to C. So those numbers, again, if we just look at the scale degrees, we have a 1, the 7, the 6, and the 4. So even a beginner who just wants to start singing and playing, they can start with that Area 51.
Very nice.
Right? So it's a simple way that they can do it and just get those bass notes. And they can then go ahead and bring in and then break off from that point. And then, once they can handle kind of that left hand, and they're thinking of the number system, 1, 7, 6. They're just thinking of root tones at this moment, because we're just using common tones throughout everything. We're not really playing the full chords. So that's kind of a quick way to kind of get students to kind of like, it's just 1s and 5s, and we're just playing it over everything. So that's a quick way to kind of get them to just play some basic chords. And then from there, if they want to start building from there, that's when you got to go through. I go through just teaching them basic chord scale stuff. So you teach them about the functional harmony, like 1, 4, and 5 are your majors, 2, 3, and 6 are your minors. 7 we're probably not ever going to use in its natural state. There, it's almost always going to be instead. You're going to have a 5 with a 7 to D over the F sharp, and then back to G. But I don't think we have enough time to get into the whole like primary chord scale thing. But when you talk about pop songs are just four chords, actually there's a way to like stack just the primary chords, the 1, 4, and 5 over a bunch of different bass notes, and you create, I don't really think of D and D over F sharp as the same chord, right? So it is the same, it's the same chord, but it's like it's a different thing. It functions a little differently, the way that it moves through the song. And so I want them to know these kind of like 9 most common chords that are used in pop music. And so if I show you right here what I have, like this is an example of a chord chart that I would use with a student. Now in this upper right-hand corner, I have kind of the essentials, things that are included in the songs. So up here, I have my basics, where this song uses the 1 chord, the 2 chord. There's no 3 chord in here. You got the 4 chord, the C, the 5 chord, D, and the 6 chord, the E minor. So you can deal with just those basic. You can deal with just those basic triads. But then you also have these minor 7s. So where you can have the G chord, but stacked over the E. I know you do this a lot because I've watched your videos. You teach that upper structure there, which this is great later when they get into jazz music, because they need to get used to detaching the root anyways when they're doing their left-hand voicings. But this like 1/6, it's a G over E. It makes it a little bit easier because they just need to think of this one chord, but it's over a different bass note.
Right.
And then understanding later how it works. And then this 4 chord over the 2. Or you can have the 1 chord over the 3, which is a G chord over the B.
And most of the times in those instances where you have these inverted chords, or you even have these 7th chords, you're going to be playing a lot of the same triads in the right hand, just movement in the bass. That's all that's happening.
Exactly. So if I jump back to my keyboard here, this beginning part where you start with the G, D over F sharp, and then you can just go right back to that G chord over the E. And then you can go up to a C chord, or they could go down to this C chord. Or if they start here on this G chord.
Tony, can you play play 1, 4, 5, just like your kind of your basic cadence that you would learn like in a method book?
Oh, just like the standard, like 1, 4, 5, 7, like that type of thing, you mean?
Well, yeah. Or you can just do the regular 5 chord as well. But then
okay.
But then take that and then show how, okay, these are the same chords, but we're just moving the bass line, and then here's your pop song.
Exactly. Yep. Yeah, that's a great example. And most of the time, I think this is a question I get a lot. I tell them most of the time in this type of pop song, you usually get a clean 5. You're not usually getting the dominant 7.
Mm-hmm.
Dominant 7 doesn't show up that often. If you're getting it, it's usually more the type of thing where you're playing a 4 chord over the 5
or going to
something like that. What's that?
Or maybe going to the minor key.
Yeah, exactly. And so, the dominant 7s, it plays such a, tremendous role in classical music. And it's like in pop music, you still get them, you still get them there. But, you're listening to like Ed Sheeran and Taylor Swift. They're not adding, they're just clean 5s, just straight major triads usually.
Well, the 4 chord becomes the dominant chord, really. Yep. Pop music. Yeah.
Yeah. Actually, I'd never really thought of it that way, but you're right. You're absolutely right. So these are the ways that, when you have a chord chart and just finding some basic movements, chord 1, chord 2, and I'll just have them go back and forth between those chords. And if you have a hard time, I tell all my students, start with ground 0, which is, I want them to hold the chord. Don't worry about any sense of time. I want you to always visualize the next movement that you need to make before your hands lift off. If they're lifting off their hands and searching, doing that, I don't want any of that because it's just wasting everybody's time. You hit this, you visualize, and you move. And you hold it. Don't worry about the time. Don't worry about the song. Don't worry about the meter. Don't worry about the tempo. 3rd chord. And then just do it. Chord 1, chord 2, chord 3. And then you can start to, the next approach is just have them play long tones. Da 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 da. Okay, so however you're going to voice that, just long tones. And then from there you can do some basic rhythm. And just simple things like that. And then, bump up the left hand. But as long as they can get those kind of core elements right from the beginning, that's all they really need. So again, it's ground 0. Don't worry about time. Just worry about the movement, the visualization, moving through there. When you're doing these, sometimes, just deciding on that first chord, think about it from the student's perspective. What inversion can you start in that will give them the most amount of like root position chords? Because that is usually something that they're familiar with. And this is, we're talking about jumping in. This isn't necessarily a first lesson with a student. I'm starting with like the Area 51, and then, I teach, you teach like basic, structure of major triads, minor triads, so that they can get those in root position. But honestly, once they can get through that, they know how to build a scale. That's number one. They just need to know how to build all the scales in terms of structure. The 1 whole half. I do like a 1 whole half with a spacer and a 5 whole half, but it's just the way that I teach it. But however, they need to know how to build a major scale. And then from that, they know how to build the chords. And as long as they can play all the root position chords, we can just jump right into this, because then you can start talking about how it flips around and the inversions. And, do you see, this is the same thing. We're putting it in this order. So if I take it here, you know, if I take the G chord in this inversion, then I can get the D in this inversion, which might be easier for a kid than starting here and then trying to get this one here, which is a little more awkward for the D chord. You know, it's just you gotta look at what they're able to handle physically, you know,
Right.
on the keyboard.
What I would like to do is maybe you show us kind of a progression. Show us a progression of how maybe from that stage kind of play through maybe to the next stage. What you would do, maybe advance the chord rhythm, do more advanced patterns.
Right. So
and,
still from like a chord rhythm style.
right, and then let's take it to melody chord where you're actually doing
Bringing in the melody.
of it,
Sure.
bringing in the melody, and you can kind of see how this can evolve no matter what level you are of a player. You can kind of see, oh, this is what I can get to, or this is what I can teach. I can really build around this and get to this level.
So, even something as basic as the introduction, which just has this, you could start off like piano safari style, like Herbie Hippo, like just the two, the fingers going back and it's just this back and forth with that. We were talking about kind of covering the chorus here and how we might kind of progress in that. And I'll loop it back to the chord rhythm style. But if we're taking the melody, the first thing I want the student to do is be able to play the melody. So again, if it's a brand new student, I'm fine with one finger stuff from the beginning. 'Cause every night I lie in bed, the brightest colors fill my head. A million dreams are keeping me awake. So here's that melody line. So from the first thing I want them to do is just get the bones of the song. So once they have that melody, they can start with something as simple as just hitting that root note. Right? And you can talk about those things of like, do you want it to hit together, or where do you want that to go, and kind of finding all that stuff. Building up the arrangement from that point, you can kind of return back to the area 51, and knowing that the ones and fives make for really nice harmony notes in the right hand. So if you're going to add a third note from this point, you could do it in the right hand. Usually what I'll do is I'll start with fifths in the left hand. So I teach all my students, they got a little activity called the Fifth Avenue, where they just learn the shapes of all their fifths, just from simply just going straight up the white keys and coming down the black keys, and noticing, the killer B's there, the only two that have like the white and the black key, and then just using that as basic harmony. Right? You can bring in the passing chord, the one with the 1/3 there, the G over B, and just adding a little bit of rhythm. From there, it starts to be, okay, well, what are we going to do? Now we can add a fourth voice in here. So we're looking for, we got our two notes in the left hand. You could go to just triads in the right hand, but I usually like to separate it. I like to build it up with, because that's not really a style you're going to be playing later on. It's good to know all your triads, but just playing triads in the left hand, it's not really what it's going to be later on. So
it's clunky sounding, and then you're limited with the range as well.
Yep.
And yeah, open fifths is definitely a better way to go, and then you can add that voice into the right.
Right. So when you go, then you can open it up to 3. You can get the full chords in there. And then building it up into doing some fills. So these are all, it's really just one step at a time. It's adding one new voice. Where does it sound like? A lot of times I'll get arrangements and I'll see they put the harmony note on every single, like they just, every single note has 2 notes, but I like that.
Yeah, when I introduce it, it's very similar. I'll just have them just like block the chord underneath the melody whatever position the melody it's in. So if it's a G, if it's the tonic note, then build in the G chord underneath that, and then for the rest of the measure, just play the melody. So they kind of still know how where the harmony is. It's almost like a choir singing whole notes, those two underneath voices all the way through, especially if they're using pedal. They can hear it, they can feel it, and they can kind of see the structure and how all it is, and it makes it a lot easier to then change it and maneuver it around.
Yep. Yeah, man. It's like I said, it's just this whole process of, just start with your melody, start with the basic harmony. The fifths can be really quick. I mean, young kids can usually handle fifths, like 8, 9 years old, like no trouble playing fifths and then playing a melody in the right hand. And then, like I said, just kind of building it up from there. I will say that I do like to have them just play through the chords too. If they're at that age where they can handle the chords, I like them to just play through the chord progression and sing the melody if they're like open to that. And most kids kind of are. I find, because as long as, again, they chose the song, they like it. So, and they're probably singing along to it when they're listening to it anyway. So it's like, okay, it's just about being comfortable here. And it's just telling them like, okay, well, you got to suffer through my singing. Like we can do this together. It's like, you don't have to be an amazing singer it's all about just connecting your voice to the instruments. Just things like that. It's finding, okay, there's that great Frank Zappa quote. It's like, you got a little piece of time. Like, what are you going to decorate it with? But it's
reharmonization as well. Like you get to a certain point, is like then you can start doing chord substitutions, and then that's when you start kind of almost like modernizing the sound and making it in your own.
Right. Yeah, and so it's this is kind of what I do, and for me again, it all starts. Yes, this is G. Yes, this is D. Yes, this is A minor 7. But more importantly, this is 1. This is 5. This is 4/2 or 2 minor 7, however you want to teach it. 1/3, 4, and teaching that number system so that you can take these songs with you as you get comfortable in different keys. Or if you come across something, you start with the circle in terms of like the easy keys to visualize, at least, like C, F, and G, because you don't have too many. It's like, no matter what key the song is in, you're never more than a whole step away from C, F, or G. So you can like pick one of those keys, start with those 3 keys, and then start to work your way out. Now you got a song that's using 2 sharps or 2 flats. Like, okay, if I give all my kids notebooks and like we write number systems down. This is the number system for here. We might even write it, right into their chart. It's like, okay, what's the code here? If it's something that's like a 4 or 8 bar progression or something, like, let's just write out all these numbers so you know what they are. And, maybe have them try to execute it in another key, a closely related key right away, just so they get used to that.
How would this tie into like a lesson plan now? Obviously, this is a little different than a structured lesson plan, but like when you learn these concepts from this piece and however far that takes it, then how does that translate to the next piece? And how do those concepts kind of hold over? Does it just kind of stay with the student and you kind of review it and you kind of take it to the next level, or how does that work?
Because I try to take each student through a similar process, which is, okay, let's start with the construction of the major scale. They have to constantly review that. And that just starts with a simple question. It's like, okay, we've identified what key this is in. Play me the A major scale. I don't know the A major scale. Okay, well, now we need to go back and explain this again. You want to remember this for next time, otherwise I'm going to bother you about it next week too. For the next song, we're going to go over it again. So it's just taking them through that same process. It's like, okay, we always build major scales in the same way. Here it is. Like, we go through that process. Now we're just going to run through the chord scale. And so that is kind of the thing that I like that kind of carries over. And that's why if I switch my camera angle here to back to this chart here, when they look up here, in this upper right-hand corner where we have all the basics, the minor 7s, the slash chords, and then I call them just variants, right? So, if you have a 1 major 7 chord, if you're adding a major 7, like, it's still just a 1 chord, right? It's a 1 chord, but it's got this extension on it. It's something that you can do to 1 chords. So knowing what you can add to things, like, for example, if they learn how to add a 9, I teach them, like, you can add the 9 to the 1, the 4, or the 5. You can do this in every single key. So when we go to the next key, where the letters are changing because, 1 is in a different place, but all of these things carry over.
Yes.
You're still going to be able to add the 9 to the 1 chord. You're still going to be able, the sus4 chord, you're not going to be able to do it on the 4 chord without taking you out of the key. So you need to know you want that sound if that's what you want. It can sound good. You can make anything sound good. It's the sandbox thing.
Mm-hmm.
Here, it's the standard diatonic system. Here's what's going to work within the standard diatonic system. And then we can get into the expanded diatonic system or non-diatonic chords, whatever you want to talk about, however you want to, label it. But I like to give them this sheet up at the beginning, which is, and it might be a little cryptic to some people to look at the way that I number things or teach things. But as far as the letter names, everybody knows, what those are. So it's, a student can scan this and look, okay, basics, yep, know all those. Yeah, I get the minor 7s, I get that thing, the slash chords. Okay, these non-diatonic chords, what's all that mess? And important to note that, like, in this song, when you get to this bridge and the chord symbols look really scary, but it's actually not that hard because it's just like, one note's moving or something between the chords. Sometimes, they're not ready for that. It's like, okay, just do this. Here's where your hands go. Just play this. You don't need to really, like, understand all this theory right now. So that's my big thing, is getting them to understand the standard diatonic system first. Mm-hmm. Then talking about, like, the extensions, the variants, what you can do to those numbers, and then carrying them through to the next song.
I'm sure there's a lot more to uncover here, but I think we're going to wrap things up. I want to thank you, Tony, for being an awesome guest, and I'm sure we're going to do this again down the road at some point. Would you like to give a shameless plug for a website or Facebook, a way to reach out to you?
Yeah, so I have my Facebook page. I'm on YouTube, and if you're a piano teacher watching this, I'm in our groups, and you can feel free to reach out if there's something here that you heard that was interesting to you and you want to learn more about it. Yeah, feel free to send me a message, and I love connecting with teachers and talking about this stuff, and I learn a lot from the students that I work with too. So it's great, and I really appreciate you doing all the heavy lifting here with getting everything set up here and organized. I think it's incredible how you keep on top of all this stuff with your students and the detailed notes for keeping on top of this. And one thing I just want to mention, I know the question I get a lot from teachers who wonder how this approach works is, like, how do you keep track of where your students are? How do you keep track of what they know, what they don't know? And honestly, a lot of it comes from just, I ask questions. Like, when we learn something, I'm like, okay, this is going to be this scale, play it. And you can always tell me, I don't know that one, or I don't know how to do that. But it's like, sometimes just because you wrote it down and you're like, okay, we covered this, doesn't mean they're still going to understand it the next time that you come to it. So a lot of it just comes through just asking questions like, hey, do you remember this scale? Do you remember how to do this? No? Okay, I'll help you. I'll get you back on track. And then usually it all registers. And, just connecting a lot of this information when you're in these songs. I'm sure these major 7 chords come up and you're like, do you remember this song that we just did? The next song that you come up with that has the major 7 chords, you'll be like, hey, you remember that Billie Eilish tune we did? And it all connects back,
That's right.
So it's tricky, like to keep track of all of it, but it's okay to give the students some ownership over that too.
That's right. And yes, please share this with others. If you have any comments or questions, leave it on the YouTube page or on Facebook. You can contact us as well. I'm active there. And if you have ideas for a show for later, feel free to leave that as well. So anyways, thank you for tuning in, everyone, to the Virtual Piano Podcast, and peace out.
See you guys.
In the next episode and final part of this series, I will provide insight into how I customize and create pop music lesson plans for all types of students, not just for students learning just pop music, but a way to integrate this into any type of lesson plan. Thank you for watching and listening to the Virtual Piano Podcast.